my land, take me where I cannot stand. I don't care, I'm still free. You can't take the sky from me.
So Mike, ask me what I did last night.
What'd you do last night?
I fell asleep watching Ariel and did not set any alarms for work and had not charged my phone. So I woke up this morning at the time I have to leave my house to get to work on time with a half-dead phone and was like, excellent. And I did that for the love of this show, for the love of the real world. So let's make it worth it and let's talk about Ariel in about half an hour. But first, let's talk about Out of Gas, which is episode 8. So written by Tim Minear, directed by David Solomon. It's a wonderful episode. It's a beautiful episode. It's Joss Whedon's favourite episode. It's Tim Minear's favourite episode. I could flip a coin between this and another one as my favourite episode. And it's a very simple story if you just break down what actually happens. A part breaks on the ship. Their life support fails. They are forced to flee the ship in opposite directions, leaving just Mal on the ship, in hope that someone finds them. Someone does find them. It's some not very nice people who shoot him to try and take the ship. He manages to make them leave, and then he stumbles bleeding back to the engine room where he repairs the engine, and everyone ends up back on the ship. And along the way, he's been hallucinating or remembering how each member of the crew came aboard. So it's a big sort of jumping back and forth in time episode, and it's just really goddamn lovely. Like, famously, the network, this is the one that bothers me about when they did it. Like, the network moved this to episode 5 instead of episode 9. Joss Whedon was hesitant to even do it at all in season 1 because he feels you have to, make the audience care about these characters before you then start delving into their origins. So this is, I think, the most egregious of the moves that Fox did. And they were very resistant to the episode in general. Like, they didn't get the whole time jumping thing. They were wanting them to edit it into a chronological sequence of events for some reason because they're crazy people. And I actually think that one of the strengths of this episode is you don't need any of that, and that there's no 6 hours earlier, 3 weeks earlier, any of that. You just see the timelines and you understand. Like, the present is quite blue, the distant past is quite yellow, and then the sort of more recent past is sort of more normal looking. And honestly, I don't see how, I guess I don't like to just say that all TV exec people are like hideous monsters who don't understand art, but how they could sit and look at this and not think it's like one of the most beautiful episodes of the whole show, I do not know. So this is like one of my absolute strongest favourites. Did this, because we've been watching them as we go, before you got to this one to do the rewatch, is this one of the ones that like really stuck out for you?
Yeah, it definitely did. I always worried it would feel a little trite on rewatch. It's definitely like a very neatly packaged episode where they just like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's like it all works out a little too well in some ways. Like there's definitely beauty in it, and all the flashbacks are pretty much just golden. The flashbacks alone kind of make this just one of the most purely enjoyable episodes. And kind of it's been a theme of these episodes is just that the actual plot is not really the real drama of what's going on here at all. You cannot watch this episode and think Malcolm's actually about to die of a bullet wound on his ship by himself. Like, that's not really what's about to happen. And if anything, it's more fun to kind of just wonder, like, how did he get shot and alone on the ship? Even as you're watching the episode, it becomes clear, like, something bad happened to the ship. It really doesn't make any sense at all why he got shot.
Yeah.
Even as it's happening, it's like, what? Wait, what? It's one of the most beloved episodes for a reason. It is an entirely character-based episode. Everyone really gets a moment here.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like the impressive part, is that really everyone gets a chance to stand out in this episode. And as I think we've learned, that is not the case with every episode quite as much as you may have thought.
No, and that will come up in the next one for sure. Yeah, like you said, it is a very simple plot, and it was born out of that title, Out of Gas. Joss's idea was just, he wanted to have one where they just break down in the middle of nowhere, and they come across another ship, and it's just to show how our people are different from their people, as our people being the characters that we're following. And then it evolved into this, and, pitching, what if we open with him bleeding? That's interesting. And like you said, you don't actually find out how that happened until a decent amount of the way in, and you almost forget about it because you're then drawn to, well, what happened to everyone else? Like, he's alone on this ship, and clearly something has happened, and you start wanting to know more about that, and then you're like, oh yeah, Mal got shot. And then you see it happen. It's like the fucking, just the pits. Like, it's a great example of like how the world of Firefly works, because, you know, we're following our fun swashbuckling heroes around all the time, and it's nice, you know, they generally are on the right side of all moral issues, but what they are doing, they are fundamentally sort of like they're operating outside the law in a way. Well, not in a way, they are wanted fugitives at times, certainly River and Simon, and their operation generally, they're sort of salvaging. A lot of these jobs are like less than legal, and they come across another ship like them, and it just so happens their people have less morals than Mal does. But, you know, it's like a cutthroat world out there where people are just trying to get by, because it, you know, you just get the sense if you're not in the Alliance, you're having a tough time. So you can either live in squalor, or you can be a pirate. And Mal is basically a pirate with a conscience.
And living in squalor. And
yeah, they are living in squalor, obviously. And episodes where they visit this sort of fancier planets, like the next one coming up, and Shindig, they sort of demonstrate that quite nicely, that you realise, oh, these are dirty people who don't have a lot when you compare it to the sort of the more refined areas of the galaxy. But yeah, I think almost all of the best episodes of Firefly... Well, there aren't really many episodes of Firefly where the plot is all that complicated, and that was the whole show.
Or that important or good.
This isn't a bad plot. It's just... I
think the issue is that there's only 2 episodes that come to mind, or a handful of episodes come to mind, where really the guest star is really what drives the plot, and doesn't just feel like a phoned-in like side piece. But luckily, this kind of eschews that fancy word. I'm well read. I'm not well learned. That's the difference between knowing good words and knowing how to say good words. Yes.
I've always wondered.
Yes, but it's such a good episode. I mean, like, everybody gets a wonderful moment here. River actually really gets a couple, and it feels like it's been ages since she got to do anything of note.
Yeah.
That just continues to be one of the most shocking things, I think, rewatching it, just because, you know, she was the focus of the movie.
Yeah.
So you kind of just expect her to be a big part of the show, but she's really not at all.
She's in the middle of the poster for the movie. Like, when we get to it, like, the whole plot is about her. And, like, you're just sort of waiting for them to do something with her here, and it just keeps not quite coming, and it never does, really.
Yeah, I think Joss Whedon has been on the record saying he likes to think of this show as being like River's story told through Mal, but like, you really never see River's story.
No, not really. And before we, you know, like you've said, everyone gets a moment, and that's like how I want to move us through this episode talking about it. But before we do that, I do love that the whole thing was called from the pilot and then the repilot train job, with Kaylee talking about the compression core and how if they don't get a new one, the ship might break down. And then it does 9 episodes later, or if you're watching on TV, 4 episodes later, which is less dramatic. But it's a small detail, but I love that they put it in twice just to really hammer it home that, you know, things matter here. Things carry over. The cows they get at the end of one episode are the cows they have in the next one, or several episodes previously. I don't know. Yeah. What are you doing, Fox? Anyway, so this is like entirely character driven, so it seems like there's no other way to talk about it other than to go through what we are learning about these characters in the present, recent past, and distant past. So normally we start with Mal, but I kind of want to save him for the end because of how the episode ends. It's a tantalising moment for everyone. So just starting with the first sort of thing that happens, and also because she's sort of the least relevant in the episode, Zoe. You know, she throws herself in front of danger. Like, River says fire, and then is it Kaylee that's about to get burnt? Yeah, and Zoe like hurls herself to push Kaylee out of the way, which comes back later with Kaylee. But
they kind of skate over like what actually happens to Zoe here. Like, why is she near death after this experience? It's not.
She was near a fire. That's a very serious medical thing that can happen, being near a fire.
Yeah,
I don't know. The
really...
force of the explosion blows her back, she hits her head, I don't know.
Yeah.
She was on her honeymoon with Lawrence Fishburne, wasn't available, they had her be unconscious for a whole episode. However,
yes,
we do learn, some things about her. We again see she is willing to put herself in danger to save other people. And the episode, the sort of first interaction with Mal showing Zoe the ship, which we will talk about more later, just her sort of whole reaction to all of it is great, I think. And, she'll have...
She's a part of a few of the flashbacks.
Exactly, yeah. It's hard to, really talk about her because she's sort of interstitial to the others. But I also like that she disobeys Mal's orders to come back at the end, because he's stumbling to try and hit this button to summon everyone back. And he actually passes out before he hits it, but then he wakes up and they're all there. And he has to ask, well, did I do it? And it turns out, no, Zoe just disobeyed his orders and turned the shuttle around and came back for him. Because that's who Zoe is. And, she has the least to do of the people. But, you still learn a little something, and she will have her fun scenes in other people's that we will talk about. Obviously, the recent additions to the crew, we know how they came aboard, so they don't get flashbacks. But Simon, I watched this and I'm still left with the impression of, how did Sean Meyer not just get a ton of work out of Firefly? Because he's so good. And he's still the one that, to me, is a non-entity in terms of an actor. And, maybe I'm just not watching the things he's doing, but he's so good in, the birthday scene and his little talk with Anara about not wanting to die. It's all just so human, and he delivers everything with an earnestness and a sort of charisma, but not cocky.
Yeah. If everyone else on the show feels a little too perfect of a character, he's the one that feels like this is a person from your life somehow.
Mm-hmm.
He grounds the show a little bit, and he's so effective at that.
Yeah, they have to walk this tightrope with him being too boring, and then not being true to himself. But I think they nail it almost every time.
Because everyone else has a quip, everyone else is supernaturally gifted at something.
Yeah.
He's a doctor, but I guess that's pretty standard stuff.
Just him and Anara, their conversation is
in particular
is beautiful. Talking about not wanting to die, obviously. Wash is the first of our major flashbacks, so I love the idea that he doesn't actually really have a backstory. He's just a guy that's good at his job, and he turned up and he responded to the ad, and he's got a funny mustache, and him and Zoe haven't met yet, and that's it. And it's always funny seeing couples before they were couples, and she doesn't like him, and then you don't get to see you're expecting he's gonna do something that wins her over, but that never comes. It's just we go from there's something about him I don't like to the present where they're married. And Wash has a mustache, and that's amazing, and should be the picture of this episode if I've done my job right. But in Wash's flashback, we also meet a mechanic who is not Kaylee. He is some dude by the name of... Bester. The real dude's called Dax Griffin, of course he is. He's just the douchiest looking dude, and he is the mechanic. And in the flashback, Mal goes looking for him, and he hears something. But he sort of is a bit dumb because he doesn't realise what he's hearing until he gets right there and sees Bester going at it with a fine young lady in the engine room. And this lady is Kaylee, to the shock and awe of fans at the time. Because, while she, as you've said, is a sex-positive person, have good sex, she is also kind of an innocent flower in some ways. Or, she's not really, but you could incorrectly read her that way.
You can see why idiotic male fanboys would put her on a pedestal of someone who is saving themselves for her, for them.
Yes, obviously.
And this ruined their dreams, clearly.
Indeed. I love this moment for Kaylee. This is one of my fondest memories of the whole show. That, I'm not one of those guys that you just described, but it's a curveball when it's oh, Kaylee didn't start out as the mechanic. She came aboard the ship because she was interested in the engine, and then she was just better at the job than Bester, and Mal fires Bester and hires Kaylee on the spot, and they have this great interaction, and she's just so charming always, and it fleshes out her character, and I don't know, it's just great. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but a large portion of the fan base made it a big deal.
I'm not surprised. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, Joss had to deal with comments to the effect of, "Why did you have to make her a whore?" And it's like,
oh my god,
grow up, for one. So not just in the flashback, but the episode in the sort of... It's hard to talk about. I almost want to call it the past, the present, and the future, but it's not that. It's the present, the immediate past, and the distant past. But anyway, the what happened to the ship scenes. Her, wanting to do something nice for Simon's birthday, trying to conjure him up a cake out of the minimal that they have. Very sweet moment, she's a very thoughtful person. And then, when Mal kind of comes to her while the ship is broken and he's trying to do everything, and again, we will come to this. Just her sort of reaction to all of it, she completely shuts down from what's happened. And she's just it's broken. Some things that are broken can't be fixed. And you wonder if part of this is coming from... Well, she talks about, I should have known. She talks to the ship. The ship normally lets her know when she's not running right, etc. I wonder if part of it is Zoe pushed her out of the way, so she has survivors. Well, Zoe's not dead, but, some form of guilt that Zoe is injured because she helped her, but then also she feels personally responsible for keeping the ship running. And just, you get a lot of different aspects to Kaylee in this episode.
For sure.
For sure. So moving from one wonderful actress to another, Anara is a lot of fun in this one. You get that very sort of poignant, beautiful conversation with Simon, in which, I didn't know this, but apparently Anara was supposed to have had a terminal illness that's was supposed to be part of her character that was never addressed, that she's dying. And knowing that, if you apply it to certain scenes, it makes sense, but it's just a bit of a shock for me to have read.
It's almost one of those things where I'm glad they use that to inform the character without ever revealing that. Without it ever actually coming to pass. So I think it makes for her character to be a little bit more dynamic, and clearly, she takes a little bit more... She lives life a bit more fully, knowing that it's about to end.
Yeah.
But we didn't actually need that crutch. It's just kind of nice that the character lives like that.
Yeah, it just gives you, an additional reading. You can apply that to it, and you can get some more out of it, but it doesn't... it doesn't matter that you don't know that. Because you do get that sort of dangling mystery of Mal's asking her what she's running from, and she never says that. But if you read that as part of the situation, that maybe hints at it. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a completely separate dangling thread. They have just such a great scene when they're negotiating the terms of her renting the shuttle. Him sort of doing the whole sales pitch and saying, oh, there's another couple who are interested, and her just sort of laughing him off and be like, no, you want me on your ship, that pause for will they, won't they dramatic effect. And just the chemistry between the two actors in that scene where they're sort of haggling with each other is great. They continue to be great, in a way that I kind of forgot a bit, because like you, the movie was my sort of de facto, this is how the world works. So I was just like, oh, she's just some girl he knows, and then I forget how much work they put into this relationship that goes sort of back and forth. But yeah, the two actors, basically every scene those two have together is wonderfully well played. And Jayne, before we get into Mal. So, I love this idea that Jayne joined them because he was trying to rob them, and Mal made him a better offer. Because way back in that first episode, he was going to betray Mal, but the money wasn't good enough. And they have that sort of thing of, well, what happens when the money's good enough? That'll be an interesting day, won't it? And that is going to be incredibly relevant next episode. But I love that that becomes even more poignant when you consider that he has no loyalty to Mal because Mal bought him, literally, from someone else. And he was there to rob him. It makes perfect sense that that's how they met. And you also, you do get, those layers to Jayne again that we've seen previously. When Zoe's being treated by Simon, Jayne is very visibly agitated when he's asking if she's going to make it, in the same way that he was, watching over Kaylee when she got shot. Jayne doesn't do well at certain types of things, and, you'll get that moment of humanity, and then he'll go back to being sort of dickish Jayne that we know him as. And, you kind of get it again or you get sort of funny dickish Jayne when Wash and Mal are arguing, and Jayne's like, shame on you two fighting at a time like this. And you're like, oh, that's a sweet, earnest moment. And then you'll use up all the oxygen. It's like, there we go. Thinking of himself. And also, finally for Jayne, like, when they're all sort of getting ready to separate from each other, he and Mal have like a little conversation. And I think it's just genuinely really sweet how Jayne clearly doesn't know how to have like an earnest goodbye moment with Mal. You can see it on his face that he's wanting to express that, and it's the whole toxic masculinity thing again, that men don't know how to talk to each other. So it's like the same stuff we've been seeing from Jayne throughout the whole series, but you see all of it kind of on display here again.
And there's also a really cool moment that they point out on the commentary for this episode, which is that when Mal confronts Wash in the hospital room, or whatever, the infirmary, right after Zoe has been killed by being near fire, Mal like grabs Wash and throws him against the wall. And Jayne, they very poignantly cut to Jayne taking a step back, realizing, the captain's mad.
Yep.
And
I love that he's scared of Mal, even though like he could clearly beat Mal to death.
Yeah, and I think that's really just an important layer to their dynamic and all that.
Yeah, and again, that will come up next episode. So let's talk about Mal, like you said. This is like the Mal episode for me because he's everything here. Like, he's at his most dickish, he's at his most sweet, he's at his most, like, he's not really quippy, I guess. You don't get as much of that, but, he says a lot of, like, beautiful lines. He has his stuff with Inara, he has his stuff with Jayne, he has his, all these scenes, and Nathan Fillion, like, acts the hell out of it, and, like, this is the Mal episode for me. So intriguing to open on him bleeding alone on the ship, and then just seeing him between these scenes sort of staggering from room to room. It's really intriguing, it's a really sort of sympathetic thing to have to witness, our beloved hero bleeding and staggering around. And just, I love that, like, he hears these things, these are the things that are coming to him in his potential last moments. Like, he remembers buying the ship and showing Zoe around. He remembers bringing them all aboard and forming this new family for himself after he lost everything. And my favourite thing about it is that it's bookended by, our first flashback is him buying the ship and showing Zoe around and, trying to talk her into it because she's pointing out everything that's wrong with it. And then the final scene in this episode is gorgeous when he's being, a young Mal, like, dressed a little bit differently, is being shown all these ships by this salesman. And he's being pitched on this one. It's this whole thing of, you pick the right one, she'll be with you for life or whatever. And then the camera pulls out and we realise this isn't Serenity he's standing in front of. But Mal isn't even listening because he has caught sight of Serenity across the scrapyard, and then you just get this lingering shot of Serenity and it cuts to black. And it's just absolutely beautiful that, Mal, like, the whole point of this episode is Mal loves this ship. It's everything to him. And the crew are part of the ship, and, like, this is his whole identity, and, like, I love that moment, that closing shot.
Yeah, it's a real special moment. It's love at first sight for him, and it's a beautiful moment. It's a big showcase episode for Fillion. Yeah. It's probably peak Firefly. It's what you want out of any Firefly episode. You want heart, you want laughter, you want just great characters interacting with each other. You love how they take advantage of their ensemble here to have that great scene with Simon and Nara, to have the great scene with River and Book, who we didn't mention, but Book he doesn't get a lot to do in this episode, but it's powerful what he does get to do, because for a man that moves around so gracefully and is so confident, to see him shaken and scared to death is very powerful, and to have River completely undercut that was great.
Well, I think you sort of see through the facade of the Shepherd. Like, we're trying to sort of talk around this based on what you've already learned, but I think if you can sort of extrapolate it out, I think he may believe these things, but because he's sort of come to them later in his life, he doesn't believe them so, like, incredibly to his core that it protects him in these kind of moments. Like, you can see, like, the guy is, like, genuinely, like, terrified.
I think yes, but I think more particularly he's terrified of not having control.
Sure.
Like, I think he doesn't fear death in a combat situation.
No.
He doesn't fear death, but he very much does not want to die, and now he has no power in stopping it.
Yeah. Well, and that's why this is infinitely more emotional than, like, if they all were just sort of gunned down in a fight, like, and it's why Simon and Ara can have that conversation, because, you know, it's just a slow, creeping sense of death that they're having to deal with. Yeah, it's just great. Like you said, like, you get sort of everything. It's sort of peak Mal. It's arguably peak Firefly. Mal's, like, hard to root for at times in this episode. Like, when you see him physically grab Wash and tear him away from his potentially dying wife and sort of threaten him, like, you know, go fix this ship. It's tough to watch in some ways. Like, he's right, but it's just the sort of... That's who he is. Like, you know, he will be that person for the greater good because he will do anything to save all of them. And he knows that in that moment that is what must be done. But the sort of sheer lack of tact in that moment... Because it's not as though he's someone he's never met. Like, Zoe's probably his best friend. And he's willing to do this. It's crazy. And he isn't quite as bad with Kaylee, but he kind of is sort of prodding her more than he needs to into sort of getting into action. And then, you know, he has a second sort of argument with Wash that leads to that wonderful thing of, you know, them just being sarcastic at each other until they actually come up with a legitimate solution. It's like, okay, I'll go do that then. You know, they do find the time to make this funny, even though it's, like, supposed to be incredibly emotional. I mean, like, all the flashbacks are funny, but, you know, the present tense, we're all gonna die stuff, they do find ways to inject humour in and to sort of, you know, bring them back from that horrible place of yelling at each other. And obviously it ends with, like, everything bad that Mal has ever done is redeemed with that sort of sleepy, half asleep delivery of, y'all gonna be here when I wake up, and then just sort of drifting back unconscious. You know, you just forgive him for all that horrible stuff he's said and done before, because he's just a poor sort of sleepy man. And just one final thing I want to talk about. So Inara sort of labels him as wanting to sort of romantically go down with the ship like an old sea captain. And Joss and Tim are sort of adamant that's not what it is. It's that he loves the ship more. That's all he has. Like, his entire identity is grounded within that ship, and he will never leave it because it's all he feels he has. It's not that he feels like, out of nobility, I must die. Because, you know, obviously, we've talked about it, like, the war, like, completely broke him. And you can see when he's talking to Zoe and pitching her on this ship, it's like the most hopeful he is outside of that pilot. And like, the pilot almost barely counts because, I mean, all of that hope is undercut by the fact that they're, like, in the middle of a fight. So just to see him as a smiling, hopeful man is so refreshing when you look at what he is normally. And his whole thing about, you know, we all die alone, and I don't know, it's just so, yeah, you get that whole thing they've been trying to tell you every episode, that this is all he has, and, like, he will do anything to protect this crew and the ship itself. It's a beautiful episode. Until we rewatch what I think is my favourite episode, this is going to go to number one for me. I know you're not, like, as insanely hot on it as me, but I think we can agree this is top three.
For sure. I mean, like, I can't imagine a scenario this is not in my top three. And also, for such a heavy episode, it's very fun and easy to watch, like, pretty much great. Every episode.
And I also, I mean, I know you kind of have to earn it because, you know, you care about these characters, and then seeing them in a flashback is the whole point of this. But this is an episode I have shown to people before, just with no context, and they've really enjoyed it. So Joss Whedon wrote the hell out of it, to be completely honest. No, Tim Minear wrote the hell out of it. Joss Whedon just helped. But yeah, it's a great episode. But we have talked about Out of Gas for too long now. Let's move on to episode 9, or 8, I think, on TV. So, one of the closest we've had to the intended run order. Ariel, which was written by Alan Croker, directed by Jose Molina. basically, River flips out and attacks Jayne with a knife. Simon realizes that she's getting much worse. Mal is not happy about any of this. So Simon's solution is to convince them all to rob an Alliance hospital. They will sell the medicine, which will be restocked, so everything's fine. Clear your conscience. And while they're doing that, Simon can use some of the Alliance equipment to scan River's brain and figure out what the hell they've actually done to her. Something I'm pretty sure we were all wanting them to do. And he's going to do it. So they plan this elaborate sort of heist where they're in disguises, and it's all great fun. Simon does that. He finds out that River's brain has been cut into a bunch of times, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But then Jayne, who says he has no grudge about the stabbing because he's in it for the money, does in fact betray them, calls the feds, is about to hand River and Simon over, but then they of course aren't willing to pay him, so he gets captured as well. And the men with the blue hands, the blue gloves, they turn up and start murdering everyone who's even talked to River, which is scary as fuck. And then luckily everyone escapes before they can get to them. But the episode closes with Mal figuring out what Jayne did and basically threatening to kill him. He sort of locks him out of the ship as they're taking off and is like, say your goodbyes, like in 30 seconds you're going to be dead. And obviously he doesn't go through with it. He lets Jayne back in. But it's a very tense standoff between the two that makes good on a lot of what we've been talking about before now. I have vivid memories of this episode because it's visually so different, because it takes place in this hospital. There's a lot of blue as opposed to the sort of browns and oranges and yellows that is the normal colour palette. So just visually in my mind, this one sticks out a lot. The men with the blue hands are very memorable to me. So it's not necessarily one of my favourites, but it is one that I remember the best. And I think it's a very good episode. I'm not willing to put it way, way up there, but certainly one of the better ones, I think.
I think it shows how genre diverse the show could be, is that we just randomly do this heist episode here in a completely different tone and style than the train job. And also just, for a show that involves lots of robbing as it is, this episode feels very, 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 very unique.
Yes.
I think the motivation behind it is really cool, with Simon being the one to quote-unquote hire them for the job.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things where it's a little rushed, just with River just so happens to cut Jayne right before a very convenient time for Jayne to, betray them. And I think that's the area where Firefly struggled just a little bit,
trying to cram a lot into its time.
It's a very, very cool episode. It moves at an incredible clip. There's so much to love about this episode. I think in particular, one of the most memorable scenes for me is Simon getting to play doctor for real in a hospital. I think that's probably the most powerful scene. And just for one, how good he is at it. Mm-hmm. To kind of, I think, a mixture of guilt that Jayne feels in the scene and just impressed. And also just kind of, I think, same with River, I think she appreciates a little bit more in this episode what Simon is doing for her and what he gave up to do for her. It's a really great moment. But even regardless of that, there's just so much. And once again, it's another good episode where everyone in the episode pretty much gets a lot to do. This is our first episode where someone is just simply not written into the episode.
Yeah, Book is off praying at an abbey.
Yeah. And Inara, quite frankly, has the exact same thing happen, only she's written out and not shoehorned in like she is with Janestown. She is just pretty much a non-entity in this episode beyond a few quips at the beginning and the end.
That was my thing. My memory of the show is she had a couple of episodes, but then almost every other one, she's at the beginning, she goes off somewhere, and then she turns up at the end for the recap. And she's been in it more than I remember, but
yes.
We are hitting this again for the second time in 3 episodes. Where she's just, bye. We couldn't think of anything for you to do. Off you go.
Which also makes sense. And I always think the value in ensembles that you can drop pieces in and out from time to time.
Absolutely, and like you roll different combinations together and see what you come up with in a situation. And you do learn a little something about like the ongoing mystique of the companions, that they have to get these medical checkups once a year. Like it's all very regulated.
Oh, that's right. But it's also just I think Book, Inara, and River really get the short ends of the stick a lot in the show. Mm. Only River gets a movie out of it, and the other two really don't.
Well, they were building yeah. I don't know what the plan ever was with Book. Like,
I don't know,
because he doesn't get his moment really in the movie. I guess
they really,
because they say that the movie was basically the second season's worth of plot shoved into 90 minutes. But like, you've got to think like Book was going to have a moment before then.
We'll get into it in the movie, obviously, but even just their decision to do that, or Joss's decision to do that with him in the movie, just doesn't really sit well with me. But we'll get to that in time.
But enough about who's not in this episode. I guess we should talk about the people that are. And like that scene you mentioned, like it sort of completely ruins my run order, but it's fine because it is a great scene, and I'm sort of echoing what you were saying here. But River at times, between the sort of bouts of what seem like insanity but are actually just a failure to communicate coherently, she does have these moments of recognition of what's happening. And she did it in Safe, where she sort of had that moment of guilt about her holding Simon back, and she has it again here, where she's he talks about how the best doctors in the Corps work here, and she's like, you should be here. And then she insists that he save, because they're walking past, or sneaking past, these doctors who are like attempting to treat this guy that's having cardiac arrest or whatever. And River, whether she's magically sensing it or not, she's adamant that Simon can save this person, and only he can save this person, and these doctors cannot save him. And Simon sort of need to be a doctor that he puts to the side as much as he can, but whenever something serious happens, you see it come out of him. He does leap to save this man, and like he's so good at it, and he gives the doctor a dressing down and is so authoritative, and at times he does seem like a sort of meek person because he's so concerned with River and he's not good at getting rough and ready. But when you see him like in his element, it's impressive. And like you said, the way I read the scene was Jayne had decided to betray them, but in seeing the extent of what happened to River, which we'll talk about, and in seeing Simon be so goddamn good at something, he's like in awe of Simon. And that my reading was, well, now I can't go through with it. But he, of course, does, which is kind of fucked up. But, or I don't know, maybe he is trying to lead them out of it, and he's like, fuck, well, I've done it now. But yeah, Jayne's reaction to that is great. It's like a mixture of awe and like guilt, and just sort of, this kid can actually do things, because they have a very tense relationship from the start, largely because he doesn't like River, but I guess he also just doesn't like that Simon's a rich boy as well. But yeah, that doctor scene you mentioned is fantastic. I think like the whole episode was sort of designed to make Simon seem a bit cooler, like him coming up with this elaborate heist, and the heist is cool. Like, I'm down for a heist sort of episode whenever, or a heist scene in a film, and just sort of them coming, acquiring the uniforms and having the fake badges and making this vehicle from scratch and having to learn all these lines, and the scene where they're rehearsing the medical jargon and keep fucking it up. Hilarious. And we get proof that Jayne can at least write, so I then assume he can read, so that closes the loophole on my question from a few episodes ago, because he is attempting to write his lines down. And of course all of that's for now, because when they show up, they're just like, cool, come on through. And they learned all that for nothing. But hey, it's very funny in the meantime. And just, it gets to where it's going eventually, but I am into the heist. I think it is sort of a fun little divergence from what Firefly normally is. And sort of seeing them all in in completely different costumes and in a different environment is a lot of fun.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So River, we do... from the start, we've been questioning, alright, what the fuck is up with River? Like, it's very cool when she comes out of the pod in the pilot, and, you see the sort of flashback, and is it the train job that opens with her sort of remembering being strapped to a chair and being experimented on? And,
yes,
you get these...
They did the Hands of Blue people.
Yes. And, you get these quick snippets here and there where it's like, it seems like she's feeling things or sensing things she shouldn't be. But they are taking their sweet time with it, and they don't really reveal anything too huge here, but you do at least get some vague answers where Simon discovers that her brain has been cut into repeatedly, and they have removed the part of her brain that, I think he describes it as, when you're worried or anxious and you push it to the back of your mind, the part that lets you do that, they've removed. So she can't deal with those kinds of things. Like, she's always feeling them. And, it doesn't actually really tell us much about, like, her more supernatural elements. But, you get a little something. And then it kind of seems like she's sensing their way out. Like, she leads them away from the hands of blue people. She knows when they're coming, and she leads them away. Like, while Jayne is adamant about going a different route, she takes them directly to Mal, and thus safety. So, it's still frustrating, but, we're getting slightly closer, I guess. And I think Summer Glau acts all of this really well. Like, it's difficult, because it's a lot of just sort of crying and despair, but I think she does a good job with it. And yeah, like when she's demanding Simon go and be a doctor and stuff, that's all great stuff from her, I think. Mal and Jayne, I think this tells us a lot about. I think we'll sort of start with Mal, then Jayne, and then come back to Mal. But I like that. So when Jayne's just been stabbed, he obviously wants to just get rid of River. And I love that Mal, like, completely shuts that notion down and is like, go away, like, get that notion out of your head, do as I say. And as soon as Jayne has walked away, he then kind of threatens Simon himself. It's just a really sort of... It's a good look at his sort of principles, where he won't allow anyone but himself to threaten the crew. Like, he's looking out for the safety, so he won't allow Jayne to threaten Simon, but then he also is adamant, hey, River's not hurting anyone. So it's a good look at him having to constantly be sort of peacekeeper or worry about everyone else kind of thing. But Jayne, this is another big Jayne episode. In my head, Jayne didn't have this much pathos, but I guess he does. Because we've got another really good episode of sort of deconstructing who Jayne is here. So when they're sort of heading in to do the job, he seems like he's initially going to overlook the stabbing, and he's like saying, the kid came up with a good plan, as long as there's a payday, I'm fine, etc. But then he, of course, does backstab them. But as I said, it does seem like he is in two minds about it. And I don't know if that's just me putting that reading on him, or if he is just sort of dumbfounded but still adamant about betraying them. I don't know.
I don't think he's happy about what he's doing.
No.
I think he kind of wants it to be like a Band-Aid situation. Like, just quickly, like, hurry up, like, come in and get them. Like, he's not really...
Come and get them before I have time to feel guilty.
Yeah, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of captures a lot who Jayne is and really matches up well, really pairs well with the final scene, which is quite beautiful in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I like that just before we get to that, when they're trying to do this escape, you get more of Jayne as the leading man type stuff, where he's like, don't worry, I've got this. And then, but ultimately, like, he just caves and they do what River wants to do. So it's not something I really noticed, but when you said that thing about Joss pitching it to him as Jayne thinks he's the star of the show, it sort of opened my eyes a bit to, like, the way he behaves. And I love moments like that, where he is attempting to be like, right, Mal's not around, here's my moment. But then it just doesn't work out, and it never does. But that final standoff it's great. So, you've got Jayne and Mal separated by a door. Mal has knocked Jayne out with a wrench while they're sort of unpacking the load that they've stolen. And then Jayne wakes up and he's sort of between the main hangar and the back ramp or whatever, and, Mal is threatening him. And they're having to communicate with these little speakers, which I don't know if I like that. I kind of wish they were having this conversation properly face-to-face, but I understand why it would happen. Like Jayne could clearly overpower Mal, so Mal can't, like, do any of this. Like, he would have to tie him up, and then that is different as well. I don't know. It's just some part of it, I think, the whole speakers and talking through a door thing slightly undercuts it, but I don't know, I may be being picky there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying for sure. I think it leads to lots of cool moments, like Jayne saying at the end, "Can I come in?" And
yeah.
And I also think there's something kind of extra sad about watching someone about to die, and all he can do is, like, talk through a box.
Yeah.
To kind of beg for his life. I think it works either way. It works either way, but I do think it works this way.
Yeah. And so, like, Mal's whole issue, I mean, he's seen through the whole thing because Mal's smart. And his whole issue is, Jayne is trying to argue that he's doing this for the crew, which, Mal does stuff for the crew all the time. And I think Adam Baldwin actually said that in Jayne's mind, he's not betraying Simon and River, he's helping out the other 6 crew members. And, he's adamant, it's not like I betrayed you. And Mal says, you did it to me, Jayne, and that's a fact. Like I said before, like this ship is him, that's all he has, and he will defend the ship and the crew with his life, and he won't abide anyone doing this kind of... he takes it personally. If you betray anyone on this crew, you've betrayed me. Yeah, it's such a sort of powerful sort of example of who Mal is, and then, Jayne does exactly as you'd expect. He tries to plead and make excuses, and he lies, and I think he even tries to offer Mal some money, I'm not sure. And none of that works. And, there's no doubt in my mind here that Mal was going... I don't think Mal was ever going to do it, but it's when Jayne actually says an honest thing, and he says, what are you going to tell the others? And then he's like, make something up, don't tell them what I did. That moment of shame and recognition and acceptance, having a human moment, buys his entry back into the ship, because I think that's what Mal wants. And so he wants Jayne to just cut the bullshit for a moment. And it's very well acted from both of them, and another great Jayne moment, and just every episode is a great Mal episode. But I would disagree ever so slightly. It's not that it's an honest moment, but it's a moment where he reveals that he wants to be a good person, he wants to be thought of as a good person, which is, I think, really represents the tragedy of just hypermasculinity so much, is that you want to think of yourself as a good person, but you've been conditioned to not be a good person. I think you could probably debate forever and never find a good answer to whether or not Mal would let him back in or not, but I don't think it's a coincidence that that's Jayne's last moment before Mal decides to let him in. Yeah, for sure. I don't know, this is the episode where... because I don't love Jayne, and Jayne is a fan favourite character, and I still don't know if it's because I don't like Adam Baldwin, or it's this. This is what I think of, that he was going to backstab River and Simon, no matter what he may feel he was doing it for. I can't help but think back to this, where he almost betrays Mal, but he doesn't, and then he does betray Simon and River, and I know why he's doing it, and I know that he seems to be exhibiting guilt, but just this is a moment that I come back to when I think about which characters I do and don't like. This sticks out to me with Jayne, where I'm always like, I know what you're going to do. I know this is coming.
Yeah, I think it really it makes me want to call back to that train job and the disadvantage of having a second pilot, where you need to tease Jayne not being 100% behind the captain. This is the 3rd time now in 9 episodes where Jayne's been disloyal. This is a really extreme case. And this is not... I was trying to remember what happened, and in my head I was like, does he switch halfway through? Does he... But no, it's not until he gets fucked over by the Alliance that he decides, to let them tag along with him.
Yeah.
It's not even so much... it's like he's protecting himself by saving them more than anything. And, once again, watching the movie first, you never think this is possible. Never. This is way too extreme for that. This is like a movie in itself. This is how you write off Jayne. And once again, I think this is one of the traps of that, it being a network show and having to do episodic storylines, is where you have to, they have to have a monster of the week, and the monster of this week is Jayne. And,
yeah.
It's not like they ignore it after this. And I think I'm pretty sure there's a moment coming up in the next episode where all the characters are like, why is Jayne being so nice all of a sudden? But, this is a pretty serious thing to do, and I think it's done a little too lightly. This is fucked up.
It is.
This is not something, in a... I don't want to say a real show, but if this were to happen on a show that does not take place on a network, this character would have to go on a serious redemption arc, and he would probably not be on the ship for that arc. it's a network show, so you just you keep it moving.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel on some level Mal knows who Jayne is and
has made his peace with it.
Yeah, kind of, and he knows that Jayne has uses, and it's a fucking rough galaxy out there, as we see all the time. A rough verse out there, even. So, while he would like to surround himself with exclusively good people, I think he accepts that's not fully possible, and, while Jayne is going to have moments like this, he is also going to be useful and, isn't entirely beyond redemption, and, and, Mal himself is not exactly the whitest of knights. So, it's very difficult, for sure.
This is pretty extreme, though.
It is very extreme. This is the moment that I don't like Jayne for.
I don't want to say it's not earned. I actually do think it's earned. I think in a 14-episode show, this is the end of Jayne in the show.
Sure.
Whether Mal kills him or not, this is the end of Jayne.
Yeah. If he lets him back, or he reveals that they're actually landing and he drops him off somewhere.
Something.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is, it's one of those things where it's they weren't planning on making 14 episodes. They were planning on making 200 episodes. But I think that's the danger in doing a plot like this. I don't this is how you end a season, and then there has to be this is a season-ending episode. And actually, if you think about it, this actually kind of would have been a good season-ending episode. That we finally get a payoff to some level of payoff to what's going on with River. Jayne is exiled for a bit and has to earn his way back into the next season. But as just another Monster of the Week episode,
they're doing something a bit different. That's what you do in finales a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Some elaborate plan that could all fall apart at the last second. That's another thing you do with a finale. Yeah.
So I guess my final judgment would be is within a bubble, this is a really fun, effective episode.
Yes.
Within the context of the show, it's weird and probably too much.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's if you are, to me, this is one of the better episodes within its own bubble.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're making your cuts, that's a check and it's not in its favor.
Yeah, it's a mark against it for sure. I'm struggling to keep a mental list of my ranking, and I'm sure this will be revealed at the end. We'll do something, but certainly not top 3 for me, but in the top half, I would say.
But in the top half for sure.
Yeah.
And also to note, because I've been trying to keep a running tally of this, is this is the last time we see the hands of blue.
That's crazy to me because there's such a vivid memory, and they appear twice.
Well, I think that's the thing with all 4 recurring characters. Is Badger, his second episode was a disc ago. It's not even on this disc. And we only got one more episode of Niska. We only get one more episode of Saffron. So
the Reavers haven't even shown up
because they don't show up until the movie.
I know, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of things I didn't understand from watching the movie, obviously. But I something about this just doesn't sit right with me. Yeah. I don't. It's all about the placement of where this episode happens and the follow up to it, which is minimal.
I agree. It's probably why Fox didn't move it to the beginning like they did with most of the other good episodes. I can't imagine they really were thinking about it that deeply. I don't know what their process is, but it just seems like they took all the ones that are the big talking point episodes, front loaded them as the first 5, and then left the ones they cared less about till later. And maybe they looked at this and thought, yeah, this doesn't feel like something you do at the beginning, and left it near the end. I don't know. Who are they even thinking at all? Who knows? They're not, because they cancelled it. Anyway, yeah, that's Ariel, and I think as a 1-2 punch, these are. I mean, we already did Jamestown and Armis Reynolds. That's a very solid 1-2 punch, but this competes with it.
This is a step above.
I think so. Above. I think this is my favourite sort of duo of episodes that you can do.
I would say actually, I would say Armis Reynolds and Ariel are kind of on the same level, especially in the sense that it's a little bit too much. We burn through Saffron's story a little too quickly. and what they do with Jayne's a little too much. But I mean, if you think of these two as being at a similar level, Out of Gas blows away Janestown. I like Janestown a lot. So.
I know you do. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's enough for these two episodes. We've got 2 more next time. In my head, we were like, it was 1 more, and then the final, and then the movie. Yeah. But there's 4 more than the finale. So next time we got War Stories and we got Trash. And I think one of those 2 episodes is your favourite episode that you keep mysteriously teasing in.
I am not revealing that at all.
Because you want to watch it to make sure, I know.
It's another killer 1-2. It's our 3rd straight killer 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
We got 2 really fun episodes coming up.
And then we've got what might be quite a rough episode. And then 2 amazing episodes to do. So, as in off the podcast. This has all been incredibly smooth. And you'd expect nothing less from the Real World crew. This has been Firefly Now, Serenity Later. Go to our SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Mike and Matt. Go to entertherealworld.com. Interact with us, damn it. We've earned it. We've earned your time.
Take me out to the black. Tell them I ain't coming back. Burn the land and boil the sea. You can't take the sky from me.